Hi, everyone. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. And if people join late and have questions, then we will catch people up. So thank you so much for joining us for our 6th weekly meeting, policy meeting for the Our Salem project. Tonight, the focus of the conversation is on natural resources and the environment. I'm Eunice Kim. I'm the Long Range Planning Manager for the City of Salem. And with me tonight are a lot of folks. I'm going to let them introduce themselves. Patricia, Jennifer, Austin, Glenn, and Greg. Go ahead.
Good evening. I'm Patricia Farrell. I'm the Parks and Natural Resources Planning Manager in the Public Works Department.
Hi, I'm Austin Ross, Long Range Planner with the city.
Hi, I'm Greg Walsh, the City of Salem Emergency Manager.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Mogolo, Natural Resources Planner.
I'm Glenn Davis. I'm the Chief Development Engineer and the Floodplain Administrator.
Thank you. So tonight we're going to be going through and talking about policies and ideas related to natural resources and the environment, but we're going to start first by a quick overview of the Our Salem project, as well as kind of where we are in the process. So for all of you who just want a quick reminder, the Our Salem project is a multi-year project to update our comprehensive plan. Oh, thanks, Austin, for the reminder. So we're going to give that project overview, and then we're going to talk about 3 different sections of the meeting tonight. The first section is really going to focus on different ideas that we have drafted through all the outreach we've done in the last year and a half, 2 years in the visioning process. And we will get your thoughts on those. And then we're going to talk about some new policy ideas that we've researched in other cities' comprehensive plans related to natural resources, the environment, and resiliency. And then really ask for your ideas. If you have questions throughout the meeting, feel free to drop them in the chat, and we will try to answer them as we go. If you have comments, feel free also to drop those in the chat. Sorry, I jumped again. So the Our Salem project is a multi-year project to update the comprehensive plan. This is the overarching kind of goals, policies, and map that guide how we grow and develop over the next 10, 20, 30 years. It's kind of the bigger framework that guides and manages kind of the growth that we've been seeing in recent years and the growth that we anticipate seeing in the future. It really does set kind of the priorities and our direction for growth when it comes to housing, economic development, the environment, transportation, parks and recreation. So a really big, broad swath of ideas. And so tonight we're really going to focus on natural resources and the environment. And the project, though, includes a lot more than that. This is a map that shows the City of Salem city limits in the black dashed outline. But our project really is focusing on the city limits. In addition to that, the area in gray. So this whole area in gray is what we refer to as our portion of the urban growth boundary. That's the area that we're planning for. And urban growth boundary, just as a reminder, is really a boundary that is meant to, that all cities have in Oregon, that is meant to contain urban development and growth within those boundaries, so we can kind of preserve and protect the forest land and the farmland on the outside. So when we talk about kind of growth in the future and accommodating our housing and our employment needs in the future, we're talking about that area in the gray. This is the area where we expect to see 60,000 more people by 2035. So where are we in this project? We hit a major milestone in the project in March, where we, after more than a year and a half of visioning in the community, brought a vision document to the City Council. At that time, we were really asking the council to accept the vision and let us know, are we headed in the right direction? That vision document included high-level goals across those kind of broad range of topics, again, housing, economic development, transportation, parks and recreation, natural resources. And it also included a proposed comprehensive plan map. That is the larger framework that we are using now to work on all the details of zoning, zoning map, zoning code, and policies. And so while the City Council did not adopt the vision, we really asked for their guidance in terms of heading in the right direction. We are using it as a framework as we work on the details of the project. So those details that we're going to talk about tonight are really the policies. I will touch on kind of the other aspects of the work at the end of this meeting. So this is, again, the 6th meeting that we've had. Every Wednesday, we're holding these meetings at noon and 5:30. We've talked about a lot of topics already. We were going to have a meeting on May 19th. That was really kind of a placeholder meeting where we were going to kind of fill in any topics we may have missed or wanted to circle back to. But because we have launched a new interactive map that really looks at proposed zoning, we are going to focus that meeting as kind of a answer Q&A if people have questions and comments related to that map. So zoning, for all of you that may not be familiar, is really the regulations that govern what you can develop on your property, like the types of uses. Can you do retail, office, etc., as well as kind of the shape of that development, how tall can that development be, etc. So we'll be focusing that meeting on proposed zoning changes. But the rest of the meetings are really focused on policies. And today, again, we're focusing on natural resources, the environment, the greenway, natural hazards, and resiliency. So tonight, as we walk through the different sections of the meeting, we're going to be presenting different ideas to you and then asking for your feedback. We're going to be asking for feedback via text or on a web browser through some interactive polling that we're going to do. And so we'll explain that in a second. But if you have questions at any time, feel free to drop those in the chat, or if you have comments, and we'll again address those as we go. So you can log into the live polling again on your phone if you want to text to the number 22333. So instead of texting to a contact or a phone number, you text to 22333, and in that text message, write EKIM 847. You should get a text message back that says you're joining our session, or you can use a web browser, and I'll put that link in the chat. The web browser allows you to just click on the link, and you can do it on your phone or on your computer, and it should bring you to our sessions. The questions will automatically update as we go, so you don't have to keep refreshing, and then you'll see the results live on the screen. So we're going to try it out and see if it works. If you have any technical difficulties, we can help you through that. So if you want to test it out and see if it's working. If it's working, please push A or text A to that number. And if it's not, let us know and we will help you. We don't have a big crowd tonight, so I'm not sure how many votes there might be. Maybe 4 or 5? Does that sound right, Austin?
Yeah, I think 5 is what we're hoping for.
Okay. Perfect. Looks like it's working for everyone. There could be additional people voting who are watching on our YouTube channel, and that's fine as well. Oh, we lost one of the votes. I'm not sure what that means. Maybe we'll move on, and if you have technical difficulties, again, let us know. So there's a lot of planning going on in the city in addition to the Our Salem project. And with those projects and those other efforts, there's a lot of overlap. So we're collaborating across the city. There's a lot of staff here tonight on all of our work. So one of the major other efforts that is going on right now is the Climate Action Plan. The City Council, if you're not aware, set a goal of being carbon neutral by 2050. And there's a task force and a surveys and there's community work going on to really understand how do we reduce our greenhouse gas emissions to meet those goals or get close to those goals, and how do we help build a more resilient community. So that work is being headed up by Patricia, who's here tonight, and we're doing a lot of work together. So as there are strategies that come out of that work that make sense to roll up into the Our Salem project, we will do that. In addition, the city recently approved or adopted the updated strategic plan. This project actually came out of the original strategic plan from 2017, but that strategic plan is periodically updated, and part of that has to do with the natural environment and greenhouse gas emissions, and so they're very much related to the Our Salem project. And then there's ongoing work, master planning work that happens at parks. Master plans are really kind of the more detailed work that happens at a specific park property as the city's trying to figure out how should that park be developed, what kind of amenities should be included, et cetera. So that work is ongoing. And then in addition, the city has a forestry strategic plan. The city has set a new goal. I think that was maybe last year that happened, or maybe the year before, a new goal to have our tree canopy cover 28% of the city. And so the city is also working to increase our tree canopy. And you'll see kind of how that's related to the Our Salem project as we continue talking about that tonight. So this is our vision statement that was in the vision document we brought to the City Council in March. And I just wanted to point out that the statement really is represents the shared priorities we've heard throughout the community, throughout all of our outreach. And a portion of it does talk specifically about valuing and protecting open spaces and the environment. So as we walk through kind of the goals and policy ideas, we're trying to figure out how do we support this vision statement. It also talks about Salem being a carbon neutral city. So again, how do we help get to that carbon neutral goal? So these are just a sample of the different goals that we have in the vision document, and they're pretty big and broad, as you can see here. They talk about protecting the environment generally, reducing our greenhouse gases specifically to meet that goal that the council set, increasing our tree canopy, our urban forest, looking at how we can promote sustainable design and development, again, as the community continues to see growth. And then how do we make sure our community really is resilient and can be protected from natural hazards? So those, as you can notice, are very broad. And what we're trying to do tonight is start drilling down on what should the more specific policies be to support those goals and really move towards implementation. So I'm going to kick it to Austin, who's going to talk about the previously drafted policies.
Thanks, Eunice. So these previously drafted policies that we're going to start out with come from earlier phases in the project. We've been working on this project for a couple of years now, and we've heard a lot of good ideas along the way. And so we wanted to make sure we had gotten them down on paper prior to now. So these ideas come from the draft policy ideas that were in the vision document that council accepted. And you'll notice that if you've looked at that document, that the ideas have been summarized here in this presentation. So it's important to remember that we're not wordsmithing these ideas. We're just talking about, is this a good idea or not? So when we're asking for your votes in the live polling, we're asking, do you like this? Yes or no, sort of a thing. And it's also important to understand that this is a small sample of the total number of ideas that we're considering as policies. So I think we have more than 100, maybe 200 different policy ideas. So we encourage you to go check those out on the project website if you want to see all of them. And there are a bunch of different resources there that you can look into. So the last thing is a quick reminder about the language that we're using here. So when we use words like encourage or promote within a policy, that refers to an incentive. If you see words more like require, that's more like a mandate. So just understanding, are we talking about, is this a mandate from the city that people do this thing, or is this an incentive-based idea where we're trying to encourage people to do something rather than telling them they have to? So as we go through these, if you have questions to clarify the intent of a policy idea or any other questions, feel free to drop them in the chat or comments as well. We're going to post the chat on the project website after the meetings so that we have a record there, and we're using all the ideas that are put down in the chat, whether we're able to address them specifically tonight or not. We'll try to, but if we don't get to one, that doesn't mean that it isn't being considered still. We also had a request to make the slides from this meeting available online, so we'll try and do that as well. So let's go to the first group of policy ideas. These ones are about environmental protection. And the first one is about protecting the natural resources in the Salem area. So the quality and function, whether that is our natural resources in terms of waterways or timber or open spaces or habitat, just generally protecting the quality and function of them. The next one about air quality is really about making sure that we're protecting the quality of air through things that would mitigate potentially any air pollutants. So that one there are many aspects to air quality, and this one specifically is about what we can do to improve it. So the next one is about riparian areas and increasing protections for trees and native vegetation in those riparian areas. So that's areas that are close to waterways and making sure that we're maintaining them and restoring any degraded corridors. And the last one is just about expanding the amount of dedicated natural open space in the Salem area. So making sure that we're leaving some space just natural for the benefits it can provide. So we'll go to this first polling question. And what we're asking here is for you to vote for all of the ones you like. You can vote for all of them or just a few, whatever you like. And while folks are voting, I'll jump back to those ideas so that you can see them. I already see a question in the chat. It says, these seem like several items that would encourage us to not reduce the use of setbacks like the MU3 zone.
Sure. So the mixed use 3 zone is a new zone that we're proposing to create and apply to some of our corridors, particularly along Chariot's core network. That's the core network is really where Chariot has committed to providing bus service or improving service. And so we are looking right now with a separate zoning subcommittee, which I'll explain later, to look at what those standards should be for the mixed use 3 zone. So setbacks will be part of that, particularly as we look at heights in that proposed zone. I think generally, yes, there are balances that need to be struck between providing enough land for development and the type of development and the intensity of development where we want that type of development, and the areas where we can protect or maybe increase our protections for corridors, repairing corridors, provide open space. So I think that's a good comment. I appreciate that.
I would maybe add that the areas where we're proposing mixed use 3 are primarily already developed. So it wouldn't necessarily infringe on any existing natural areas, but it'd be primarily in places that have already been developed and intensifying development there potentially. So looking again at the poll, it looks like people have had a chance to vote. And just a reminder that we're streaming live to YouTube, so there could be some folks watching at home that haven't logged into the Zoom meeting that are voting as well. So we'll keep moving along. We have a couple more environmental protection ideas, as well as a couple of greenhouse gas emissions ideas on this page. So the one about brownfields is about assessing, cleaning up and remediating any brownfields in the city and supporting those efforts so that areas that were potentially previously polluted through whatever uses were there historically can be cleaned up and made safe for use now. The environmental impacts policy is about mitigating any environmental impacts that come from city-funded programs or projects. So whether those are efforts to improve or build new infrastructure, or whether it's some other type of city-funded program, just making sure that we're considering the environmental impacts and working to mitigate them. The land use and transportation policy is specifically about supporting and facilitating changes in land use patterns, so the way we use our land and how that interacts with the transportation system to reduce emissions. So whether that's working towards more walkable neighborhoods or working to make sure that we're concentrating denser development near transit so that people can use that as a viable means of transportation, working to make choices about how we use our land and our transportation system that will help us reduce emissions. And then the one about municipal operations is about working on efforts and strategies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions through the city's operations and facilities. So whether that's using greener building materials or making existing facilities more energy efficient, or looking at our operations and trying to make those a little bit more energy efficient. So whether that's working to move towards an electric vehicle fleet for the city or some other operational process, that would be about reducing emissions from the city and leading by example. So we'll jump over to the poll on this one. And I'll go back to those ideas so people can refresh their memories. If you have any thoughts about these ideas, we'd love to hear them. I'm curious what the city can do to support brownfield cleanup. That's a good one. Patricia, do you want to speak to that?
Sure. Yeah, we definitely look at for brownfield redevelopment opportunities for either for redevelopment or for parks. And so our urban development department is actually the one who's very involved with assessing brownfields and looking for redevelopment and getting grants for those. So I think that would probably be along the lines of supporting the cleanups, is doing a first phase one assessment of what that cleanup would entail, and then working with the landowner to clean those up and to get grants through different state and federal agencies. And we've acquired several park properties that are actually former brownfield sites, such as the acquisition of Minto, the conservation area, and Riverfront Park were both former brownfield sites.
Awesome. Thanks, Patricia. So it looks again like plenty of people are voting there. What are the use limitations to the rehabbed brownfield sites?
This is getting a little bit out of my wheelhouse, but I know that at Riverfront, for instance, there's a cap on that separates the contaminated soil from the new soil put on top. And so anytime we want to do a project that involves excavation or going below that cap, we have to coordinate closely with DEQ on that and have that monitored and tested.
I would also say that it sort of depends on what the cause of the brownfield was. So for example, there could be some some sites that were formerly gas stations where now there's some contamination under the ground there, and potentially it's still zoned for commercial use, and once it's rehabbed it could be used again for a commercial use. Potentially other sites might be more hazardous or might involve a bigger cleanup, and so they could potentially be more amenable to different types of uses.
And sometimes the cleanup involves like removing the material and excavating it out and taking it to a certified disposal area, or it could be putting a clean cap over it. Just depends.
So I see another question that says, could there be examples for municipal operations? I know running back and forth with portable generators to power pump stations during power outages comes to mind as something recently that seemed a point we could improve on. Yeah, I think there are a lot of examples of municipal operations where we could look at greener ways to do what we do. The city has a large fleet of vehicles, so working to either electrify or make purchases for energy efficient vehicles would be something. There are a lot of different departments that happen, so it could be with our housing folks and making sure that our affordable housing is also energy efficient housing. Or it could have to do with the purchasing for simple things as simple as what light bulbs we're using at City Hall. So I think it could run a really wide range. So why don't we move to the next group here? These ones are about the urban forest and natural hazards and resilience. So the first one is about tree preservation. So looking at ways to increase the quality and quantity and the health of trees and tree groves that are preserved through our regulations and incentives. So whether that's a new zoning regulation that increases the number of trees that we require to be preserved. We already preserve some, but maybe there could be more. Or it could be an incentive to encourage people to plant more trees, something like that. Or to preserve more trees during construction. The one about tree planting is about promoting and contributing to tree planting across the Salem area, and especially in areas where we have a low tree canopy now. So right now we have a citywide goal for tree canopy cover, but that might not get us down to our narrow enough geographies where we can differentiate between, like, this neighborhood has a lot of tree canopy cover while another one has not very much at all. And so focusing in on those areas with less. The one about transportation infrastructure is about resiliency and identifying and enhancing our emergency transportation routes and regularly updating our emergency plans to make sure that we're ready in case of a natural hazard or some sort of natural disaster. This is something that I think we already do a good amount of, but again, we can always work to do more. And then seismic upgrades. This is about making sure that both public and private buildings are more resistant to seismic events. So for example, the remodel of the library downtown to upgrade it and make it more seismically stable is an example of a public building, but also how do we encourage private property owners to do the same. So we'll go to the poll again here, get the voting going, and then I'll jump back to the ideas. We have a question that says, would C include a strategy for moving existing overhead wires underground whenever possible? Potentially, and I know that Public Works encourages that now when new development takes place, but perhaps there could be additional efforts there.
I just want to add that, and maybe Patricia can speak to this, the recent tree canopy assessment that happened, did that break down? I thought it broke down tree canopy by neighborhood as well, so we could really pinpoint
Yes.
areas, neighborhoods.
Yes, it's broken down by neighborhoods and watersheds, and we look at the overall tree canopy goal is for the citywide canopy goal. So we actually reached our canopy goal last year of 23%. We exceeded it. We had 24%. So we've moved the goalpost out to 28%, and that over the next 10 years. So, but we are targeting planting efforts in the low canopy neighborhoods.
So it sounds like, this is something we are working on, but it also makes it more permanent and official to have a policy specifically about it as well. So is this something we want to make sure remains a priority?
I think that's a really good point, Austin, that some of these are ideas that we are pursuing, but they may be new ideas that they don't exist in our current comprehensive plan. So when we do this update, because we don't do this update very often at all, this is really our opportunity to put policies into the document for the long term.
Yeah. So it looks like we've got our votes on this one. Why don't we keep on going? This group of policies is about design and development, as well as the Willamette Greenway. So the first two about design. The first building design is about encouraging resource efficiency in the design of buildings. So that's both referring to using energy efficient and sustainable building materials, but also making sure that once built, the building runs efficiently and is energy efficient in its operations. And then the one about renewable energy is about promoting the production of renewable energy in both public and private facilities. So whether that would be putting solar or wind potentially on city buildings, or incentives to help private property owners do the same. The one about vegetation and wildlife is specific to the Greenway now. So conserving riparian vegetation and wildlife within the Willamette River Greenway. Again, this is something that we have some rules about already, but do we want to make sure that this is a priority in the future? And then the other one's about public access and ensuring that we're including access to the Willamette River when adjacent properties develop or redevelop. So if a new development takes place, do we want to make sure that we're making it so the public can still access the river? So we'll jump again to the poll on this one, and then I'll head back over to the ideas. And I see a question that says, for tree preservation, is there any coordination with the counties, Marion and Polk, that the city does? Eunice, do you want to speak to that?
Patricia, do you want to speak to that?
I guess the answer would be no, that we are kind of focused on our own boundary at this point, are the city limits actually, because until things are annexed into the city, we don't really have control over the trees, the tree planting and the tree care. And so at this point, we're focused on trees within the city limit.
And I think maybe this question came up earlier in the noon session but we do have opportunities to weigh in on different land use applications. So when an application comes in for a certain type of development, we do always point to our regulations and try to push kind of the things that are important in Salem. But those decisions ultimately are made outside of us.
That being said, I think it's important to note that these policies would apply to the gray area that we saw in that map earlier. So they would cover the entire Salem urban area, and that includes portions of Marion and Polk County that aren't yet incorporated. And so we are coordinating with the counties in that regard to make sure that they are aware of the ideas that we're proposing and to make sure that they understand the implications.
I see a question in here about how does Salem's tree canopy goals compare to other cities of our size? And so when we were doing the community forestry strategic plan and setting a goal, we looked at all the different cities comparable in size and also in the Pacific Northwest because of our specific climate. And so it wasn't like you look across the United States and it's really variable based a lot on rainfall. And so we tried to pick a goal that was met, say, kind of the specifics of Salem, based on what we had. When we first started our tree planting, we had an 18% tree canopy. So over the last 10 years or 12 years, we've really increased it just because we've really been focused on that since we set that goal. And then we've also broken it down by the neighborhoods as mentioned. So we looked at, how was it distributed and picked kind of the top 25% of neighborhoods as kind of setting the goal for the rest of the city. So it's really variable. I can't tell you, like, for instance, Portland has a higher canopy goal, but they also have Forest Park included in their overall canopy. So it kind of skews the results a little bit.
Thanks. There's also a question about whether there's consideration for using recycled materials for building materials in housing and commercial use. And so I think that could be potentially a part of that idea about the green building design and encouraging people to use resources efficiently in the design of buildings. So that's definitely, I would say that falls under the umbrella of this policy. I'm not sure if the city is doing anything currently, but it's a great idea.
That idea has also come up in the climate action plan, I'll just note.
It's a good point. In regards to vegetation and wildlife, I would hope that this includes more than just riparian zones. In Sunny Slope, we enjoy rascal deer families and raccoons that frequently inhabit streets and yards. So that's a good point. Certainly our habitat areas in Salem aren't just confined to the Willamette Greenway or riparian areas. And I do think that we have some policies that get at that sort of thing later in the presentation. So I appreciate that thought. So it looks like people have had a chance to vote here. That's great. And we will move on. So I just want to pause and give everybody a chance to ask questions or share thoughts that they have on these previously drafted policies. And then we're going to shift gears to some new policy ideas. And on those ones, we're going to move a little slower and ask a specific yes or no on each policy. So if you have any comments on these ones that we've just shared, please drop them in the chat. We are happy to talk a little bit more about them. But we've had some good thoughts as we've gone through too. So I understand if there is an extra. And if we keep moving and other ideas come up, feel free to share them along the way. So I'm going to pass it off to Patricia now, and she'll take us through the first few new ideas.
Okay, so some of these are going to be slightly overlapping. And as mentioned previously, some of them we're already doing, at least maybe at a city municipal government level, but they're not written down as specific policies. So the first one, Austin, you want to pull up? Okay, so the first one is specifically about invasive species, and that would be to prevent or reduce the spread of invasive plants, and I guess I would add animals in here, and support efforts to reduce the impacts. So for instance, the city is very active in trying to reduce the spread of plants such as knotweed. There's also the invasive turtles and non-native turtles that are taking away habitat for our native turtles. So we're trying to work with ODFW on those. So there's a whole variety of different plants and animals that we're keeping an eye on, and also that we're trying to do an early detection and rapid response approach to them so they don't spread. So this would be having a policy specifically about that. So is a new policy about invasive species right for Salem? I'll just add that one of the efforts that we're undertaking right now is working with Willamette Riverkeeper to get rid of some of that plant that's growing in the Willamette Slough. It's called Ludwigia, or water primrose. And while it might have a pretty flower, it is filling in the slough, and it makes it very hard for wildlife and for recreational boaters. Well, looks like people are supportive of that idea.
All right, should we keep moving?
Is 7 about the number that we're getting?
I think that's about right.
Okay, let's move to the next one then. So this is one that we were just talking about and was brought up about habitat connectivity. And so this would be to develop a strategic action plan and look at the habitat connectivity within the city and identify some of those crucial connections. It could be between green spaces, streams, other areas of natural habitat. And this is to help species that are at risk, or specific insects. For instance, we're looking at monarch butterfly habitat and making sure that there's adequate habitat in the right distance from each other so that they can easily spread between them and migrate. And so that's what this is addressing. So would it be a good policy for Salem? And someone brought up at the last meeting, which was a good point, about Oregon white oaks and how much habitat just oak trees in general provide for a variety of species. And so it's not necessarily a linear corridor. It could be just connectivity between different species within a certain range that they can access. All right, well, that one looked popular as well. All right, the next one, community landscaping. So this also came up in the climate action plan as far as having better resiliency for food supplies and for local food. So this one is talking about converting lawns for food production, pollinator habitat, and for hardy, drought-tolerant native plants, which also then support pollinators and our native wildlife. And so this is some things that we're actually doing in some of our parks. Pretty much every single park master plan we do now, we include pollinator habitat, and we're looking at existing parks to see if we can take some areas out of lawn and turn them into more into pollinator habitat. There's a question there about, I'm curious how the city would offer encouragement to residents. And so that's one thing that we're looking at is how do we, I mean, the first step is education. What is the value of reducing the amount of lawn? I mean, not only does it produce, could you possibly produce food, but you could also reduce your water bill. You could reduce the amount of fossil fuel you spend on mowing your lawn, for instance. So we have a clean streams program, and we're actively trying to educate people about different alternatives that they can look at and different ways that they can manage their own landscapes. As far as, I mean, so that would be kind of the encouragement. And then we're also looking at if there's ways to incentivize some of these things as well. And then we also had a good idea about workshops, education, and low-cost plant sales would be great. So yeah, those are good incentives as well. Thanks. Okay, looks like some people are sitting that one out, or maybe they're eating dinner. Okay, next one, climate change, adaptation, and resilience. So this one is also mentioned in slightly different wording in the climate action plan. So it's to make sure that we are keeping, looking to the future when we are managing our natural areas to make sure that they are resilient to to climate change and to natural hazards. So for instance, in our street tree planting, we have changed our list of trees that are acceptable because we've, through our inventory, we've noticed that we have a lot of maples. And so we would want to diversify our urban forests so that we're not susceptible to one type of blight or insect. It also could be something as making sure that we have more trees along our riparian areas to keep the streams cool, and protecting floodplain areas so that there is some ability of the streams to move and increase in flood capacity if possible.
Patricia, there was a question in the chat about, I think, the previous policy idea. It says, is there any effort at pollinator habitat in public rights of way? With the loss of inmate labor coming, it seems prudent.
Yes, actually, we have started doing some work in the right of way to plant more pollinator habitat. And as it is lower cost as well once it gets established. There are height restrictions sometimes for plants. And sometimes the pollinator habitat, the wildflowers or native shrubs can get, they have to be within a certain height so they aren't blocking any kind of visibility. So there's that, but there also is, that is a good possibility to do that. Okay, we had some unsure and some no's. Okay. All right, should we go to the next one? Unless anybody wants to elaborate on one of their answers. Okay, resilient urban forests. So I just mentioned a little bit about that. So it's making sure that we have a diversity of trees. We're also looking at, and several cities are doing this, is looking at trees specifically or plants as well that are just adapted to drier conditions. So for instance, a lot of cities now are pulling plants from Southern Oregon and trying those out in some of their plantings to see if they're more drought tolerant and more adapted to what we predict might happen here in the future as far as increased hot days. So just to kind of diversify and to have more of a focus on native plants as well. Okay, I think that was the last one for environmental. So I'm going to turn it over to Greg Walsh, who's our emergency manager.
Great, thank you, Patricia. All right, so new ideas, really getting more information out there, but the point of hazard awareness is to increase outreach and education for natural hazard awareness and disaster preparedness, especially for vulnerable populations. So although we actively do presentations and try to do community engagement to get and build awareness of different hazards, this is looking at really doing more for that, and especially in vulnerable populations, making sure we have everything in multiple languages translated and engage special interest groups that may need it. So this is asking if we should put more into getting hazard awareness out there.
Craig, maybe you can speak to some of the stuff that you're already doing that maybe we talked about during the noontime meeting.
Sure. So there's a number of programs ongoing. I currently do presentations. We actually just published this afternoon that I'm going to be doing some lunchtime presentations on things like the power outage and water storage and how do we make sure that we are prepared. The big goal here is that we get everybody to 2 weeks ready with the potential hazard of the Cascadia subductions and earthquake, as well as power outages, floods, and other events. It's really important that people are aware of the hazards that they may face here in and around the city of Salem. And then also making sure that they're prepared for it. We know that pretty likely if the Cascadia event happens or when it happens, that we will likely be without water, food, easy access to water, food, power, sewer, gas, electricity, cell phone, internet, really the works, and even bridges and overpasses, and the roads will be disrupted. So planning for events like that and getting that word out so people are more prepared and they're self-sufficient instead of relying on others is really one of the big goals that we have here. And it sounds like most people think we should get more hazard awareness out there, which I can't help but agree. All right, and then the other bullet that I have here, or the other slide, is the natural hazard map. So ensuring that the city hazard maps stay up to date and reflect the best available science for a variety of hazards. Now this includes flooding, which we're part of the flood community rating system. So getting that information out and making sure that we have up-to-date and accurate maps of flood zones and flood awareness is important. Looking at landslides, liquefaction, and earthquakes is pretty important for us, and working with the DOGAMI, the Department of Geology and Mineral Industries. They're spending quite a bit of time doing landslide evaluations with LiDAR, and then planning for earthquakes. And they update the maps and do assessments on the ground for liquefaction and earthquake susceptibility. So working with those other organizations to make sure that our maps stay up to date and making sure that they're available to the entire community is really important for us. Thanks, Eunice, for posting the upcoming events. Okay, so having more maps available to the community sounds like a good idea to everybody. That's excellent. Thank you. Turn it back over to you.
Great. Thanks, Graham, Patricia, and Austin. We just wanted to leave space to see if there's any other ideas you all had, more comments and questions. We know that we've only touched on a very few small sample of all the different ideas that are out there. I can post a link to kind of our packet of new ideas in the chat as well. But if there's any other kind of questions or concerns you have, this would be the time. I'll let everyone take a couple seconds while I post that packet. Okay, well, y'all can think about it. Now we'll move on. And if you have more questions or you think of ideas, feel free to drop it in the chat or let us know. So over the next few weeks and month, we're going to be doing more outreach on these draft policy ideas through these weekly meetings, through an online survey, through community organization meetings. And the idea is that we're going to take all the input and revise our draft policies and add to our policies and then present that back to the community. The goal is to start an adoption process that includes these policies and the whole comprehensive plan update project by the end of the year. So this is our project website, which I think I dropped in the chat, where you can find information about these policy ideas, this whole project. We're constantly putting updates on there about different opportunities to provide input. So I would encourage you to check out that website. Our policy survey is on that website as well, with and it's in English and in Spanish. So please do pass the word on. And then in addition to that, in addition to policies, we're working on a lot of other zoning related work. And so as I mentioned earlier today, we did launch a new interactive zoning map that shows proposed zoning changes across the city. And with that map, you can drop push pins and add your comments. Let us know what concerns or questions you have, whether you agree with the proposals or not, if you would change it, for example. And we'll be using that to kind of revise our proposed zoning map. And then in addition to that, we are holding meetings with a zoning subcommittee. That subcommittee includes 4 city councilors and 4 planning commissioners, and they are looking at specific code changes that could be made to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The first meeting was last Friday, and they started talking, for example, about increased heights along our core network, so our frequent bus service routes, looking at densities, looking at parking. The next meeting is going to be May 27th. So if you're interested in attending those meetings, all the information is on the project website. You can sign up to attend, to provide comment, to email comments to that committee. And so again, May 27th is the next meeting date. Oh, and then back on the interactive zoning map, again, May 19th, in place of these policy meetings at noon and at 5:30, we are going to kind of be having a Q&A. So if you have questions on specific zoning or general questions about our zoning proposals, we'll be here to answer them. There's a question here about, can I ask what are the most prioritized proposals on the zoning? Can you clarify that question? Do you mean the zoning proposals that the subcommittee is going to be looking at? Feel free to unmute. Largest expansions?
So maybe he's asking what the biggest changes to the zoning map are that are proposed.
Oh, okay, great. Thanks for that interpretation, Austin. As there's several big ideas that really came out of the visioning project that you'll see in the map. One of them is to really look at increasing the amount of mixed use that we allow on our corridors, particularly our corridors with, again, frequent bus service. So these are areas where we are proposing new mixed-use zones or existing mixed-use zones. In addition, we are proposing to add land for multifamily housing. It's a need in the community based on our previous work, looking at our future projections for who's going to live here, what the housing needs are. So you'll see on the map, we've proposed multifamily land distributed across the community. That's another thing that we've heard, is that the community really wants to see multifamily housing not isolated to one neighborhood or another, but distributed across the community. It's another big idea. We've introduced a new neighborhood hub. Yes, we've introduced a new idea of the neighborhood hub, where we would allow, but not require, small-scale businesses and services and shops within residential neighborhoods to really kind of create more walkable mixed-use or walkable complete neighborhoods. And so we've proposed 33, I think, neighborhood hubs across the community, which is, again, a new idea. I say those are probably the biggest ideas or the changes that we are looking at. Any other questions or comments? Looks like we have a lot of time left, but I'm happy to wrap up early and let you all go. There's not further questions. Or is there anything else that Greg, Austin, Patricia, anyone wants to add?
I would just add that we'll be out and about in the community for the next month or so, getting feedback from various community groups about these policy ideas as well as proposed zoning. So if you know of anyone who you think we should be talking to, please do let us know. Eunice's contact info is there, and we'd both be grateful if you would share with us any additional people we could talk to.
And I would just like to add that the climate action plan is also going to be gearing up over the summer for doing outreach. And so if you are interested in that, go to salemclimateactionplan.com, and the schedule is there. And if anybody has a group that would like to hear a presentation, we'd be happy to do that as well.
There we go. I didn't really have anything else specific. Just thank you everybody for participating in this. It does really help us out.
Then I just wanted to say thank you again. I appreciate the feedback. And if you think of anything that you forgot or questions that come up, feel free to contact me. Again, my contact information is there. And you can also sign up for our email updates on that project website. So we send out periodic emails to let people know of new opportunities to participate, new information, etc. So it's a good way to stay in touch as well. So with that, I'll say thank you. Thank you so much.